I'm going to call Ed Anderson up, who's going to introduce our speaker, who's come from Chattanooga. Ed?
Thank you, President Shannon, and good afternoon again, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce a Rotarian whose Rotary roots don't just run deep, they're practically part of his DNA. Tom Kale, his family legacy spans 4 generations. His father, Tom Sr., was a member of the Chattanooga Downtown Rotary Club. His grandfather and great-grandfather were both Rotarians in Durham, North Carolina. Speaking of Durham, Tom is a Duke University alum, so I'm sure I know who he's going to be pulling for, even though they got the wrong 4 letters on the front of that shirt. He's also a 30-year veteran of the commercial real estate world in and around Hamilton County. He's a past president of the Chattanooga Breakfast Rotary Club and has put more than 2 decades into putting service above self into action. The reason he's here to talk to us today is that Tom currently serves as our district disaster relief chair, where he and his team build the blueprint for how Rotary responds when our neighbors need us the most. Might be the Gatlinburg fires, might be the hurricanes ripping through East Tennessee and North Carolina, and similar disasters. Now, Tom also balances those heavy responsibilities with a much more popular role. He's the district hospitality chair, and in some circles, he's known as the district bartender. So if you go to president-elect training, the district conference, the district assembly, you're gonna see Tom in his natural habitat. Now, I asked Tom if his disaster relief experience helps him as district bartender. He said, yes, absolutely. I learned that if you run out of ice at a Rotary event, it's a category 5 emergency. When he's not managing crises or refreshments, you might find him on 2 wheels. He's part of the Fellowship of Motorcycle Riding Rotarians, and he actually last summer rode his motorcycle 8,200 miles to Calgary and back by way of Los Angeles, which is not on the way to Calgary. But he rode his motorcycle in Calgary and back for the Rotary International Convention. He's joined in his passion for Rotary by his wife, Jane Bowen. She is the charter president of Rotary Rocks Chattanooga. So please help me give a warm Rotary Club of Knoxville welcome to a leader and an adventurer and a mixologist, Tom Kale.
Let's see here. We know how this works in Rotary. We have a stopwatch, right? Thank you, Ed, I think, for inviting me to join you guys today. I'll try to not be boring enough to put you to sleep. I know you've all had lunch. Naps come naturally after. So let's get into this. Seems that every day the news carries some story of a new large-scale natural or man-made disaster. Some of you may have a little disaster fatigue, as a matter of fact, or feel helpless to make an impact when so many events that are negatively impacting the lives of fellow human beings, especially some Rotarians. I'm not sure I have the answers to alleviating those feelings, but I will share with you the possibilities that exist within Rotary. And after all, we are people of action, right? And we live out the creed of service above self on a daily basis. Disasters come in all shapes and sizes. A house fire is a disaster to the people that live in that house. A wildfire, like what we saw in Sevier County in 2016, affected hundreds of families. The stated purpose of what we are working to do, first of all, Rotary International officially entered into disaster relief in 2012. And that was the result of a partnership with Shelter Box. Or is everybody here familiar with Shelter Box? Which Shelter Box itself was a Rotary project that came out of a club in England. But the stated purpose is to assist communities to overcome and recover from natural disasters. I became interested in this subject back in 1992. When Hurricane Andrew struck Florida and then Louisiana. At the time, I was a member of the Chattanooga JCs. That organization was well-versed in club-to-club assistance. The Chattanooga JC Club somehow got connected with a club in New Iberia, Louisiana. They told us what they needed. They needed chainsaws, diapers, and ice. So we sent them an 18-wheeler load. And, and you hear examples in disasters about communities getting stuff they don't need, like all the people in Katrina that got winter clothing, So, but they assessed their needs. They relayed those to us and we fulfilled them. That was sufficient disaster relief. New Iberia benefited from the presence of a nationwide network of local clubs that were ready, willing, and able to help through service. Does that sound familiar? Rotary is perfectly positioned to be a major player helping communities recover from natural disasters. With our network of 46,000 clubs, we bring to the table a real force and desire to help others. But we're still building that network. As I said, Rotary just got into this from the top part in 2012. Rotary structures of clubs, districts, and zones is a strength when it comes to dealing with natural disasters of scale. The zones have committees to offer guidelines and to serve as a network of communication between regions. Districts, through the network of district governors and district committees, are working to establish district-wide networks and mechanisms to address disasters both inside the district and when events happen outside of our area. And clubs are now getting into the act by identifying a point of contact in each club, assessing the roles that the clubs want to do, and individual members who want to play a role in alleviating disasters. And some clubs are even getting into some blue sky planning at the club level. It's important to remember that participation in this area of service is 100% up to the clubs. Remember, Rotary doesn't work via edicts from up top. It works by each individual club doing what they want to do in a way that is their choice. I'll talk more about club play, what a club can do here in a bit. In most efforts where the club, most of the efforts have been going on prior to 2012. They were mostly club to club. A great example was the clubs along the U.S. Gulf Coast have had agreements with the Caribbean island clubs for decades for hurricane relief. So when a club would strike in the Caribbean, those clubs would mobilize to help those communities. Vice versa, when clubs along the Gulf Coast were impacted, those clubs in the Caribbean that could were helping. That's been going on for a long, long time. But when Rotary got into the business, it's still working, but in 2019, Rotary, through the Rotary Foundation, formally established a disaster relief fund. Now that fund is whenever we hear disasters, that's everybody wants to give money. Right now, that's the mechanism to give money. And what Rotary does is that goes into the fund, then districts that are in the disaster zones can apply for $25,000 grants that are really quick decision making. It's not like our district grants, so that's the mechanism. So grant money is coming back into the districts that are affected by disasters via that funding mechanism. Additionally, the World Fund is there, right, for global grants. And global grants can address long-term needs in rebuilding through that mechanism of funding if your club wanted to participate that way. At the district level, we had our first disaster relief committee was established in 2007. with a mission. We were given a mission to address, come up with a plan to address disasters. We didn't know much back then, but we did recognize a few things. We knew that Rotary's role in disasters was not that of a first responder. We were the responder adjacent. We would let the professionals do what they do best. We would be the ones that would supplement their efforts and support first responders by committing to be the group that would be there until the crisis was over and the community had mostly recovered. We also recognize the family of Rotary is a real thing. And therefore, our plan was to address first the effects of a disaster on the local club and its members, and work to stabilize them first, and then let them tell us what the community needed. Family taking care of family, so that family can serve their community as they know best. Following Hurricane Katrina, the Bay St. Louis Rotary Club meeting place was gone. All that was left was a slab. I remember reading in the Rotary magazine about a club in Mississippi, further up inland, that was making weekly trips for that club to be able to hold their meetings on that slab in Bay St. Louis, which I thought this was really neat. The role of the district is to provide support and to maintain the network so that efficient and comprehensive support can be provided to communities affected by a natural disaster. Most of us can remember what happened in 2008, 2016. Y'all were a big part of that help that happened in Sevier County. Roy helped the Rotary Club of Pigeon Forge spearheaded the establishment of the Relief Center at Boyd's Bear to coordinate material donations and volunteer help while also providing much needed supplies and items needed for those suffering in Sevier County. That center stayed open for a year and a half. Staffed, mostly by Rotarians. It also rewrote the book literally. FEMA changed their guidelines for establishing such relief centers because of Rotary's example. Now, not all disasters can be on the scale that needs a relief center, but when it is needed, we wrote the playbook. A year and a half ago, our area experienced another major disaster, Hurricane Helene. Obviously, it didn't just devastate Western North Carolina, it also affected this side of the mountain. And in the end, Roy helped, came again to the rescue and established a relief center in Newport. Additionally, relief centers were set up in Greenville and up in Bristol, and those weren't Rotary driven. One in Newport was. But Newport showed us some things as a group that will play a role in how we deal with such disasters in the future. The main lesson we learned is it's a lot easier to do one of those things when there's a local Rotary club. We were challenged from the start because Rotary wasn't in Newport. The closest club was Pigeon Forge or Morristown. Without a local club there, we didn't have the connections with the local community and its leaders. In this case, Newport, there's a lot of distrust of outsiders. And that distrust hampered our efforts. I'm being nice. The lack of working relationships, especially with the elected officials, proved to be an ongoing challenge to that relief center. And in the end, we couldn't keep it open very long. We did make an impact, we did help, but it was a struggle. One thing that was interesting that came out of that is something that I had never thought about. And we think about Katrina and we remember the FEMA trailers, right? Well, one of the things that we were pretty successful at doing was finding people that had RVs that they wanted to get rid of. And we had I think it was an RV dealer here in Knoxville that would refurbish those RVs and then give them to the people in the disaster zone, which I just thought was a really, really cool thing. And something that we will take into consideration in the future. Members of the disaster committee at the district and zone level, along with multiple district governors, were also in contact with our neighbors in the Asheville area. We had a couple of very large Zoom calls. It's an interesting thing if you understand anything about Rotary politics. You know, we're in these zones. North Carolina is not in our zone, so it took some effort to actually create that communication bridge. But we did, and we helped them in some of the challenges that they were facing. They had some great people, Rotarians over there that had, a lot of them that actually moved up from Florida that had experience in dealing with hurricane relief. So that was a true blessing. But in the end, there were about 45 clubs involved in getting relief supplies to individuals over there that covered about 10 to 12 counties in Western North Carolina. But we really exist as a disaster committee to assist clubs in pairing your resources and to recommend to the governor's team the need to advance seed money. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. We really don't have, at this point, have a real mechanism at the district level for receiving funds to be distributed as seed money in disasters. But we're working on it and trying to figure out how to do it, because we don't want to compete with what Rotary International is doing, but we see some needs to be able to do some really quick reaction club to club wise. So now we're basically here as the district committee to be a liaison between the clubs and in partnership with Rotary leadership to align the response initiatives. Now let's talk about your club. And realizing that I'm from Chattanooga, we're kind of in the same boat. The likelihood of a community disaster on scale that we really would have an opportunity like to dig into deeply is a little less than some of the more remote areas. But we can still have them. I mean, Chattanooga had a huge tornado outbreak a couple of years ago that required a huge volume of response. And, sadly, we weren't ready as a Rotary group to take on that. So we're still all trying to figure it out. But at the club level, it would, we want you to decide the role that you want to play. It would be great to see all clubs hold an honest discussion about the role they want to play when a disaster strikes locally, when one strikes in our district, and beyond. It would also be great if clubs spent some time planning and preparing for disasters. It would be beneficial if the clubs got connected with other response organizations before any disaster occurs, because this would enhance our ability to participate in response effectively. The district is encouraging clubs to go through some blue skies planning. Don't wait till the disaster hits. Let's plan ahead of time so that when there is a crisis, the club will know how they want to react. It is suggested that clubs spend some time internally assessing your club's level of interest in participating in disasters response. If your club does want to play in this arena, then establish a person to be a point of contact with the district, not necessarily the president. It could be somebody that really wants to do this. And I will say, every club I've spoken to, it seems that the clubs really want to do this. And there is invariably somebody in the club that has come forward in almost every instance and said, I'm interested in that, and I will lead my club in that area. So it seems to be an area of interest for Rotary, for the Rotary clubs in our district. But not only establish a person, make a plan for who in the club will be responsible for what actions when a disaster occurs, and make that person known to the district. Do a club assessment of resources. Most disaster responses will need money, they'll need materials, and they'll need manpower. What does the club want to do? What do your members want to do individually? What outside organizations do your members have a connection with that might be useful in a disaster? Maintain that data in a way that can be assessed when it's needed. If desired, you can establish memorandums of understanding with local emergency response agencies, outlining what your club wants to do in a time of crisis. This will smooth the process when emergencies happen. Perhaps invite some of these agencies to be guest speakers. Better yet, a member of your club. Does your club want to fundraise for critical recovery supplies, such as tarps? Or does it want to buy them and store them in a warehouse so they can be used in a strategic location, so they can be used when a disaster occurs? What about conducting annual preparedness training for members? We're inviting speakers to focus on preparedness topics, such as disaster insurance and how to build recovery plans in advance of a disaster. Would your club want to host an event or a drive to assemble preparedness kits that can be distributed to community members? Or host a volunteer event or a campaign for club members to work with their communities to create a preparedness plan? And where is a safe place to store important documents? Maybe your club members want to partner with local disaster recovery organizations to gain free training and resources, including various types of insurance. I mean, think about it. You've got a lot of different types of insurance that are involved when it comes to disasters. There are also a couple of organizations that somebody may want to be a part of. There's the COAD, which is your Community Organizations Active in Disaster, and VOAD, which is Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster. These groups are vital when a disaster strikes. They are the ones that handle a lot of the ins and outs of how to deal with a disaster. So that's all in the blue sky thing. So what happens when a disaster hits? Once a disaster hits, the first course of action is to take inventory and connect with your fellow Rotarians. Make sure that everybody in your club is okay. And what do we need to make sure that they are, if they aren't? So, because if your club members can't function, the club can't function, you can't do what you're designed to do. So it may sound a little selfish to help Rotary first, but the fact of the matter is we are a family. We should help each other first, because then we can effectively help our community. Then you also need to reach out to other partners, your government authorities, your faith-based organizations, and your local VOAD and COAD. These touch points will increase the organization and coordination of all response efforts and reveal which local, state, federal, and private resources are available to the community. The goal is to establish a clear understanding of need and responsibilities. Remember, there is not just one way to support a disaster. There will always be room for assistance. Some local Rotary clubs may wish to add capacity to larger disaster organizations, while others may want to help with distribution of goods. At the same time, some choose to fundraise or to offer space to help homeowners identify helpful resources to recover. There isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. There are many different ways to help. If your club is a hands-on club like mine, your thing might be to volunteer for things like debris removal and muck and gut and mold suppression and all that kind of fun stuff. We have in this district a really solid relationship with Disaster Aid USA, which does that exact thing. And they rely heavily on, at this point, Samaritan's Purse for personnel to do muck and gut and to do molds and mold alleviation and those kinds of things, which were very much a part of what happened in North Carolina and East Tennessee. Nothing says that we can't pick up the phone if that happened again and say, hey, I've got 10 volunteers from the Rotary Club of Knoxville that want to help. Where do you need them to go? And we can make that happen. Maybe your strength is in administrative support, tracking or obtaining in-kind donations, fundraising, communications. Communication is a whole other area when it comes to disasters. We saw what happened in North Carolina with the communication challenges that they had. And we've got a member I'm trying to get on my committee that is going to be really focused on that one issue. Logistics inventory. First and foremost, remember it is vital to establish that the stability of Rotary clubs and Rotarians in a disaster area, to establish that, because they are the best position to determine the needs of their community. Note that if there's not a Rotary club in the disaster area, like we had in Newport, perhaps we can get a club that's geographically close to help, but there are going to be challenges. Once the event is passed and the news outlets and the national organizations have moved on, remember, recovery efforts are not over. In many ways, they are just beginning. Long-term recovery may take months and even years. We are permanent fixtures in those communities as Rotary. Our clubs may find that there are long-term needs to support rebuilding organizations that require funding, resources, and volunteers. Fundraising activities may need to continue. Unused relief supplies might need to be stored and redistributed. There also may be a need to host programs to help impacted victims with FEMA, insurance companies, avoiding contractor fraud, etc. The path to recovery can be arduous, but having consistent community efforts can alleviate suffering. As I mentioned, we are at the district level working on things. We are trying to build a network of clubs. We're trying to work on funding and funding mechanisms at the district level. There have also been discussions about material goods and do we buy a bunch of tarps or do we buy some equipment at the district level? I don't think that's going to happen, but it's an interesting discussion. Do we find a used food truck and be the ones that show up to feed everybody, both volunteers and victims? So it's just a lot of ideas, and it really is interesting because it is a blank slate. And as I said, it's up to y'all to determine what you want to do, if anything. This may not be something that the Knoxville Rotary Club wants to tackle, but if you do, we'd love to have it. That's all I got. Thanks for inviting me today. If there are any questions, happy.
Yeah, and I get the part of it being like a grassroots effort and really, systematically needs to be driven from the local club up. But at the district level, how many conversations are being had with like FEMA, at the state, national level to say like, where are the gaps from your all's perspectives? And what potential roles could like a local club play? And then us going, to our local first responders and saying like, hey, is this also a gap you're seeing here? And then us kind of being surgical that way. So that was my question.
Yeah, at this point, in those, that's a great point. We probably need to do more. Roy Helton obviously already has a great rapport with FEMA. So we can deal with FEMA. We're still getting our feet wet in terms of communicating with the other organizations. I think in some ways we look at it as we hope that the local clubs will make those connections locally. And because it's rare, it's more rare that you see an event that it was the scope of what we saw with Helene, where we needed to be able to reach a bigger group of people. But yeah, we're still working on it too, and we're still developing our network. Any other questions?
Tom,
Yes.
can you speak to what Rotary did at Gatlinburg that was adopted by FEMA?
It came down to I think the whole relief center thing. What FEMA saw was an effective relief effort that spanned whatever it was, a year and a half, completely staffed, completely all volunteer staff. Materials came in, they went out, people were helped, volunteers were coordinated. All of that stuff happened, and it happened independent of FEMA. Now, the truth is you do get credit with FEMA for things like that, and you actually get paid. So I think that somebody told me that the check from FEMA to the Rotary Club of Pigeon Forge was a couple $1 million. So it was not a small amount. But that also covered some expenses that they had. I don't know what they had to pay for Boyd's Bear, but but that's what I don't think FEMA had a plan for disaster relief centers on that scale. And so we came in and literally they asked Roy to rewrite the book, and he wrote a really wonderful manual, and they have incorporated. So,
Do we have any more questions for Tom? Tom, thank you very much.
thank you.
It's our tradition